Today I spoke with Sharon, and we spoke all things hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, the evolution of humans, our nature, our design, everything. And we talked so much. We're going to do another episode soon, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Good morning, and welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm all good. All good. It's sunny this morning. What could be better?
Yeah, definitely. And my dog has been sunbathing in the garden. And interestingly, just pre-countdown and introduction to this, you and I were getting into, and I wanted to stop because there's something that I think is probably very important for the subject that you and I are going to talk about. And there's a little teaser for people, but it's that I was saying that when people come on as guests, one of the things that's most important for me is how they feel comfortable. And that's not my place to decide. It's my place to facilitate that, because some people are happy to just come on, having never met me, never spoken to me, and we'll just go fly by wire and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Other people are not comfortable with that. So they want some almost like pre-flight checks. Do you know what I mean? How do you do this? What's this about? Can we have some conversation first? Can we have, can I send you some question? And sometimes I'm aware that because I'm very like, yeah, whatever's easiest for you, that doesn't really reassure everybody. And they're almost like to the point, well, does this guy know what he's doing? He doesn't seem to be very organized. And it's not. It's about, well, what's comfortable for you? Because I'm literally comfortable turning on the screen and seeing if we can have a chat. And if we can't, it doesn't, and there's always one podcast that stands out. And ironically, you and I briefly mentioned Caroline Kavanagh before we started. She will know exactly which podcast I'm on about, which episode I'm on about, where me and that person it just did not click. And the funny thing is, there would been a lot of conversation prior to that with messaging. It took about 2 months to set the podcast up. And we had lots of to and fro. And this person has a social media account and talks quite freely on it, writes amazing blogs. But when her and I actually spoke, it just didn't click, didn't gel. So weirdly, all of the things that should have worked because it was put in place didn't help. So I've always kind of been like, yeah. And I know it doesn't always reassure people that I know what I'm doing or that it's going to work. And which is a good way of getting onto, because I'm just going to let you explain what it is you do.
Yeah. Well, just if I could say, first of all, just what I was thinking there as you were talking is that we all know that people buy from people. And if you don't actually to be you, to be authentic, you don't get the best out of people. And that's the same whether it's podcasts or just whatever you're expecting from people in life. And that's very aligned to what we do.
It is.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
No. So, yeah, it's just, I mean, Easibirthing, Hypnobirthing. I mean, just explain what that is, because.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to, if I may, just to explain a bit of the context first of all. So myself and my husband, my colleague Stuart, have been hypnotherapists and psychotherapists for 27 years. So we're quite an established business. And Easibirthing and Hypnobirthing being part of that is part of our specialist services. So we're hypnotherapists and psychotherapists based in Salisbury and do all that you would expect hypnotherapists and psychotherapists to do. But just over 17 years ago, we opened, first of all, a hypnobirthing business, whereby we provide everything from therapy around that, including things like birth trauma, any fears around childbirth, even morning sickness and hyperemesis gravidarum, that severe morning sickness that everybody knows that buzzword because of Kate Middleton, and using hypnotherapy for exactly that. So there are a lot of things around that we can do. The service has expanded most definitely over the last 17 years, whereas now we're what's known as Easibirthing Fertility to Parenthood. So that service provides everything for people on their journey to parenthood that hypnosis and psychotherapy can throw at it, if you like. So that can even support people who are having difficulties conceiving. But we realized that, we're only people with 24 hours in the day and 7 days in the week. So in the last few years, what we've been doing is expanding our services to as many people as we can possibly reach by opening an online school. And so as well as our one-to-one, both live and live video sessions, like we use Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. But with our online school, we're providing courses for parents and parents to be, and people that are having trouble conceiving. So right the way through with that journey from fertility to parenthood.
Okay, so because this is the wonderful thing that has kind of changed with the internet, isn't it? That you can be accessible to anybody anywhere. I mean, it's the wonderful thing that this helped me start a podcast is that strangely the pandemic was great for me because people were like, oh, you want to do a podcast via Zoom? That I do Zoom all the time. And it's just like I can access people all around the world. So one of the things that we were just sort of talking about before we started is how we make people feel comfortable. And you and I were about to really go down that road, and I was like, "No, stop! We can record this." And that's it. Because just for clarity with people, I don't have any children, so it's never been something that I'm not sure if there's a nice way of saying it's just not something that's ever kind of interested me. I've never wanted to be a parent, if that makes sense. Which I know people find strange because, like, what? You've never wanted kids? Nope, never.
No, and I wouldn't say it's strange at all.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't dislike kids. I'm a great, fantastic uncle to my niece and nephew, and they would certainly evidence that for you. And so would my sister, and it's not always convenient, but it's I just never wanted my own. But there is a lot of anxiety around parenthood, and for people that want to have children. So, how do you start for somebody that might be listening to this? Because as soon as you're feeling that anxiety or nervousness and you want to explore what options are available and what's out there, how do you start the process of making people feel comfortable?
Okay, so we're talking particularly about anxiety for parenthood itself.
Just somebody, like, because just that, like you and I at the beginning were talking about how I realise that my carefree attitude towards how we organise a podcast can make people feel uncomfortable. Like, does this guy even know what he's doing? And so what is it that kind of like, how did you, with the business, how it started and everything, what were the initial kind of pain points that people might have had that you had to learn to pivot with?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that comes to mind is the biggest barriers in people feeling comfortable, both if they're approaching someone for support or, and I see that as akin to that admitting that they're struggling, no matter where that is on that fertility to parenthood continuum. And shame and guilt really are the two big obstacles in people being able to come forward. They feel they're going to be judged. So when we're talking about comfortable, that is right up there as the barrier that we need to break down really right from the beginning. And that could be from the very initial email or phone call or whatever. But I would say it starts even before that, because we do a lot of blogging. We've got a strong social media presence on pretty much every platform that I've ever heard of, and some that I'm still learning. But and it is actually at that point that we want to help people feel comfortable. So part of it is actually about normalizing their fears and anxieties so that they don't feel, my goodness, I've got no right to feeling like I'm feeling. So
because there's something that is still kind of rattling around in my head that you said about shame and guilt. And now obviously, because I've never had some I don't have children. It's not something I wanted to pursue. Why, why would? Yeah, sorry, I don't even know how to ask the question without sounding really clumsy. But why would somebody feel shame or guilt about wanting children?
Okay, so it could be anything from, and bearing in mind we're in the context as well of being therapists for
Absolutely, yeah.
the years that we have. So I think it's kind of going to cover that plus the specialist service. When someone is pursuing a particular life plan, so let's think about we're talking about the aspect of whether or not to have children. You have got many people do feel shame and guilt around that, the potential thought around how society feels about your decision consciously to decide whether to have children or not. So if I can use the example of you, sometimes even at that point, you can get individuals who are feeling shame and guilt.
Now like that context behind it. Yeah, I do get judged because I've never wanted children. Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, you've made a really good point that sometimes there is judgment out there. It's unfair, of course. And
so I just think, okay.
Exactly. But as you can imagine, someone that maybe already has low self-esteem or low self-value or feels not good enough, they can feel not only are they being judged by everyone for everything, and so there's a lot of kind of imagining people are judging when they're not. And also, as you quite rightly said, if you do come across judgment, no matter how unfair, that it's taken on board that, if you like, that somehow I'm bad, I'm wrong. Hence the shame, because shame is a very internalized process of people feeling actually there's something wrong with me, essentially, there's something wrong with my decision making, with my attitudes in life, with my capabilities. And so it can attack the very core of our identity. And please do not get me wrong, when we're talking about that conscious decision to have children or not, we're not saying that everyone feels this, but very often we get people approaching us that are really struggling with that decision, even when it's a decision that's right for them.
Yeah, because there is something that you said then again, which I can understand that comes across as confusing. Because, like I said, I find it amusing that people judge me because I've never wanted children, but it doesn't bother me. However, because I'm openly or outwardly confident, I have quite a thick skin. But one of the things you and I were talking about pre-starting the podcast was I know Caroline Kavanagh because she's my therapist. Mm-hmm. So I do still have sort of traumas or issues that when they get on top of me, I seek help from Caroline. So Caroline is my go-to person but in other areas of my life, no, it's everything is water off a duck back. But then, like you mentioned about something to do with self-esteem and stuff, there are areas of my life where that's been a struggle. So I reached out, I sought help through Caroline. And yes, so now that you and I have this conversation, I'm starting to see like all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle where you can be perfectly healthy, look like you're having the ideal life, and then you make a very important life decision. Like, actually, I've met somebody, we're going to have kids, and then it all comes tumbling down.
Sure. What's really interesting is we often see those two obstacles, and again, but bearing in mind we started talking about people feeling comfortable, feeling safe, if you like, is that we see that again, even where on the fertility aspect, if people have decided that is for them, that they do want to have children, that one or other of those people involved, and we certainly see people for single person IVF, so there isn't always two people involved. But we know that for the reproductive system to work, we need a healthy response from mind and body, so that actually you can subconsciously block fertility. So imagine if we get to that point where you have made a decision that that's what you want to do. Sometimes it may be, if we're back to that self-esteem, someone who actually they want children, but deep down they actually feel that they're not going to be a good parent. Maybe they had experienced themselves of less than ideal parenting, and so there's a feeling of that they won't have the competence, the skills. Sometimes it can be that someone has suffered a loss in the past, so that may be a direct loss around conceiving infertility, like a miscarriage, or that they've lost a child. So there may be a subconscious protection. So this could be someone that's already made that decision and is still feeling that shame and or guilt, because guilt is about what we feel we do out there, if you like, what we do, what we say, how we interact with the world. So shame and guilt are very closely related, but they are different. And so often we can actually see people that have no evidenced issue with actually conceiving. They've had every medical test known to man, and there is nothing physiologically wrong, but their subconscious is actually blocking even that process. So again, you get those uncomfortable, if you like, emotions coming in there.
I think people don't quite realize that just that the subconscious controls everything. It doesn't matter if a blood test or a scan shows that everything is fine. That's not how the body works. If your subconscious switches something off, it's off. And no amount of pills, no amount of vitamins, supplements, prodding by the doctor is going to change that. If when your subconscious says that's not going to work because we need to sort something out, it doesn't work until the subconscious is, I suppose, satisfied that the problem's been resolved. So, because people don't realize that one of the sole purposes of your subconscious is to keep you safe. It's just like, I'm not going to let the conscious mind decide what's good and bad, because I listen to you talking to yourself sometimes, and you can be quite the idiot at times. So I'm going to have overall control, and we are going to, the subconscious is going to decide how the body reacts in certain situations. And
very powerful.
And I think that this is what people don't realize. It's like, oh, I want it. I want this. This is something I want. This is something I'm going to embrace. Your subconscious doesn't give a shit. Your subconscious is like, no, we have a ton of things we need to put in place first, so that that deep state inside your consciousness is, we're ready for this. We're comfortable with this. We're safe. We're going to do a good job. Or not so much we're going to do a good job. I trust you. We trust ourselves to overcome any problems that may come our way. We're competent. Because if you don't feel that in your consciousness, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say is, not only do we know the subconscious has, if you like, a direct messaging system to everything physiologically and psychologically, so can potentially slow down processes. I mean, my goodness, we see it in birth as well. But generally in therapy, we talk about the definition of trauma. You mentioned trauma earlier.
Yeah.
The definition of trauma being the gap between our perceived threat and our perceived ability to cope. Now, the word perceived is really important when we talk about the subconscious, because the subconscious might be stopping you going up and petting that lovely cuddly lion that's escaped from Longleat, but which would be good. It is protecting you, as you say. But what happens if you're in the middle of a Tesco's or a Waitrose and you have a panic attack? That is that your subconscious perceived threat, if I just show you with my hands, and that perceived ability to cope is way down here. And so there may not be actual threat, but the stuff that happens in the middle causes a reaction from the subconscious that is powerful, but is not protective, is actually quite obstructive, and against, and often incongruent with what we want and what we need.
Well, I mean, because that's something I've actually written about in blogs, that I've talked about in my videos, and I talk about when I'm doing therapy with my own clients, is we actually have this incredible primitive operating system. And the example I give to people, if you look at an iPhone, I think it's had about 10 different upgrades on its operating system. right? Microsoft, if you look at Microsoft Word, from where it started to where we are now, right?
Mhm.
And like, we were talking, I've got a new laptop now and it's all upgraded. Everything's upgraded. But the operating system that we were born with 2 million years ago has not been upgraded once. And its only design is to keep you alive. And people misunderstand. Its job isn't to make you feel safe. Its job is to recognize danger. And it
Mhm.
recognizes danger and makes you flee because its only purpose is survival, to keep you alive. Now, the subconscious, it's not the most articulate way of putting it, but it doesn't actually care if you feel scared or not. What it cares about is you reacting to fear. It's like,
Yes.
I need you to
Yeah.
be scared, so you will run. And in this modern life we have, with stress of work, stress of bills, stress of road rage, waiting for public transport, all of these things, they build up and build up and build up. And your operating
Mhm.
system is just like, I can't cope with this anymore. I've had enough. And that's
Mhm.
why you get a panic attack when you're trying to buy milk in Tesco's,
Mhm.
because the
Yeah. Yeah.
subconscious is just like,
Absolutely.
I've had enough. We need to chill, that, get rid of this shit. And, and it's a real shame because people don't realize how deeply the subconscious affects us, and that actually because people do, and this is something I discovered in my 30s after like some sort of like some traumatic personal experiences. um I started getting panic attacks. I was like, why am I? And I remember having one at a friend's barbecue, and I was just like, luckily there was a part of me that is quite survivalistic, and I was just sat there like, why am I having a panic attack at my friend's barbecue? I never want to hear. And I was just like, and the reason I was able to do that is I did a lot of acid in the 90s, so I learned to control that side of me, right? Is just, it's just like, hang on a second, this, and it's just like, right, so breathe deeply, what's going on?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I was drinking beer on a summer afternoon in a friend's garden, having a barbecue with friends. I knew
Yeah.
everybody there, we were close. There was no reason whatsoever to justify a panic attack. And it's possible, it's not something I know enough about, that being so relaxed is what caused the panic attack.
Well, so what's really interesting, to pick up, if I may, from your example,
Yeah.
when the operating system kind of gets it wrong, thinking it's got it right, i.e., telling you to fight or flight from that barbecue, for example,
Yeah.
um, and so those are kind of because of your experiences from the past, whatever they may be, that it's decided that that's part of the learning. The real beauty, and why hypnotherapy can be such a great tool for psychotherapy, no matter what area, whether it's birthing, whatever that you actually use this in, is that it is your neocortex at that point, your logical and rational part of you, that is saying, I'm in a friend's garden, I know everyone, everything's great, I'm drinking beer, I'm relaxed, what's the problem? But it is your amygdala, which is the operating system that hasn't been updated, part of what we call your limbic system, or
Yeah.
your emotional brain. That is the thing that gets the signals slightly, we're talking about milliseconds,
Yeah.
microseconds, not sure how to put it, but very, very fleetingly gets the messages of the environment, what's happening. It gets all of the sensory experience slightly ahead of time. And so if your amygdala, whatever it's linking it to, rightly or wrongly, decides that you need to feel panicked at that time, then your neocortex is going, what are you doing? Why are you reacting like that? But your amygdala has already got you to react in fight or flight with that panic. Now, the beauty here is that we call it the critical factor, where the amygdala says, there is a threat, and remember, that could be perceived threat in front of you. You do not have time to think what you know about this scenario. We need to react now. This is a survival thing. Yeah. It's what we call the critical factor. And so it essentially shuts off the involvement of the neocortex, the logical, rational part of you. The amygdala then has reacted with the panic attack before you know it. However, we know that hypnosis can do, and hypnotic states can do, something called critical factor bypass. Sounds like a really dodgy operation, doesn't it? It's not.
Or one of those software updates they send you for security.
One of those software updates.
We need to do an update and restart the computer.
So what we can do, even with this ancient software of the limbic system, is that we can, during hypnotic states, which I'm sure you probably know, you've obviously got experience there, is an alpha brainwave state. So our brainwaves slow down between 8 and 15 hertz. And it is at that time that we bypass the critical factor. So if you like, we have the ability with hypnosis to stand back and go, hang on here. So this is what your amygdala, your emotional brain, is reacting to. This is what we know logically and rationally. I'm at a friend's barbecue and everything's fine. So what happens is that gap between your perceived threat and perceived ability to cope is kind of, if you like, challenged at both sides. And so it's like, of course I can cope here. I'm perfectly safe. I'm perfectly comfortable. There is no threat. It's just that I had learned maybe years ago that there was something triggered in this situation that meant I felt a threat. So we can relearn what we can do. And thinking back of your iPhone idea, and that absolutely, that's a really good one, is, and maybe this is where my technological knowledge stops and ends, but what we can do is change the communication between the apps or between the software, and actually say, hang on, maybe we need to update this, because our neural pathways that have been established, even from threat or trauma in the past, can always be changed. They send messages to each other, brain cells, that have to jump across what we call a synaptic gap. And that happens throughout the brain. So if cells are no longer firing together, i.e. this really is threat, and this is how we need to respond, i.e. run away very quickly, what will happen is those cells will actually start to join new brain pathways, so that you're no longer reacting with a panic attack in a friend's garden, for example.
And it is
what's not useful can be changed.
Absolutely, and it must be difficult as well, because and this is a stereotype, obviously, but you got a couple, they come in, we want to have children, we're struggling, and it's like, I don't understand it. The person opposite me is the love of my life. That person's the love of my life. We're intimate. We trust each other. There's a level of emotional intelligence between us. We've talked about our issues. We trust each other. And I can't fall pregnant.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then an anxiety would build, because they go and see a doctor, a medical practitioner of some sort, who tells them everything's working. And it doesn't matter how well you word that. It's like, well, everything's working, so the problem must be you.
Yep. 25% of cases of fertility issues are what we call unexplained fertility. So the biggest chance is that they are actually psychological and not physical at all. But think of on the fertility side, and it is very similar when we get into pregnancy and birth and how these systems work there. Our reproductive system and our digestive system, interestingly, are two of the biggest systems in our bodies that take a lot of energy. They take a lot of oxygen and blood supply, etc. But they're also the ones that aren't directly involved in our survival. Now, you may say the digestive system, we've got to eat to survive. Well, yeah, but maybe we don't eat this minute. Maybe our subconscious believes that we're in threat, so we need to react. So we'll switch that one off. We'll switch the reproductive system off. Let's not even go down that route. And so stress, and it may not even be stress that's related to fertility, although what you were saying there about you go to investigations, you get more anxious about it is absolutely true. We say the longer a couple takes to conceive, the less likely they are to conceive. Because of that, because of all the stress buildup. And what I was going to say is as part of that, it can also be about stress about job. It can be, as you say, all the various deadlines in life, and increasing gas and electric bills, and everything creates this response of stress within our system. So if the blood and oxygen supply is taken for everything else, the reproductive system is where it's taken from, or certainly one of those two major systems.
This is something that I think people don't understand, is there are essential things your body needs for function. Like you said about food. Now, anybody that knows anything about fasting will know you can very comfortably, if you sort of set yourself up properly, not eat for 10 days. I've done 2 7-day fasts. And once you get past about somewhere between 24 and 36 hours, it doesn't cross your mind to eat. Ever. Yeah. And it gets to the point where you have to remind yourself it's time. Okay, it's been 7 days. You need to have something to eat.
Yeah.
And one of the things I try and explain to people is we massively misunderstand and underestimate how efficient our body is.
Yeah.
We complain about, a little bit of arthritis, grown in knees, grown in joints, a couple of scars I've got from injuries and a few pulled muscles. And that's the point. If I was a car, I'd be a write-off. The body doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The body is just so efficient at functioning, and it's doing so many things at the same time. And while you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't feel that great, you've just no idea what a great job your body is doing. But one of the things that makes the body so efficient and is its ability to we need resources for something else right now. So, or another way of looking at it is, and I think about when you look at the sort of in the animal kingdom and all the people with conservation who are trying their hardest to keep species alive, and they're like, I don't understand, we've got everything perfect. But that animal, whatever it is, and we are only animals, is like, these are not the perfect conditions for survival.
Yeah.
If the conditions for survival are not perfect, or you subconsciously don't believe it's perfect, your body will switch off its reproduction system because it does not want you. So going back to what we were saying originally is about the operating system, because humans, although not in this current form, but if you go right down to our ancestry, we're 2 million years old. And I think in this format, we're a couple of 100,000 years old, or 500,000 years old or something. But giving birth, raising children, giving birth from when our operating system started was dangerous, incredibly dangerous. It was literally life or death.
Yeah, there were predators around.
Yeah, both for you and the child. And we see that, people will watch a nature program and see some antelope spending half an hour, 2 hours, start to struggle with pregnancy, and lions come along and eat it. They'll see the same with zebras, right? Now that those animals know they have a small window in which to give birth. Otherwise, both them and the child will die.
Yeah.
But humans think that doesn't apply to us.
And it most definitely does. Of course, we're animals as well. And I know that's exactly what you're implying. What's really interesting is if any of your listeners or you have actually have ever worked with horses. Horses, I think, are always a really, really good way of seeing what happens if a bit like that antelope or zebra that's about to be eaten, to give the best chance of survival for them and for, I'm going to say child here. I know we don't call a zebra a child, but to give birth to their young, is that all animals have got this very, very efficient inbuilt system of being able to slow down or stop the process. Because, of course, giving birth, whilst we're giving birth, does leave us vulnerable to predators, to threats out there. And so we don't want us to be compromised, if you like, if we, and again, perceive threat. It's not just the real threat, but it's a parent threat as well. And that could be as much in birth, my goodness, of that you're frightened of hospitals, that you've got a needle phobia. It could be that you don't like your midwife that's just come on shift and you don't feel safe because you haven't built a rapport, or you don't trust their professional advice. It could be anything at all. And so we are within, as animals, we're stopping things. Horses, if they are spooked in any way, they kick in very, very quickly that this is not a safe time and place. And so labor will just stop. Yeah. There is a lovely story born out of tragedy, unfortunately, but a lovely human interest story of a woman in the Indonesian tsunami of quite a few years ago now. I don't want to guess, maybe 12 years, maybe more. And she had been one of the lucky ones, if you can call it lucky, of being able to see the waters advance. So she had, it knew they were going to engulf her village. She was a local woman, not a tourist. And she was actually in the advanced stage of labor. So she had enough time, and only enough time, because if any of us have seen any of the pictures or even watched the Ewan McGregor film, that the waters advanced really quickly. She climbed a tree. She climbed to the highest point that she possibly could get to. Sadly, her village was engulfed, and she was stuck in that tree for 3 days. Okay. No rescue, no boats, nobody to come and help. Her body stopped labor, just like horses, just like any animal that feels in threat would do. Now, our body can't hold on forever, because we're also dealing with in birth, the physiological thing of placenta will eventually start to deteriorate. So the system that's sustaining the baby needs to let go of the baby, essentially. So she did start labor with it 3 days later, had her baby in the tree on her own. True story. And luckily, her and her baby, both very healthy, were rescued within a couple of hours of her giving birth. So lucky, most definitely. But again, it shows just how powerful, if we perceive threat, obviously that was real threat. It was right for her brain to instruct her body to act in that way. But that's how powerful it can be.
This is the thing, is especially like if you just go back a generation or two, these would have been called miracles.
Yeah.
And people, so to give a little bit of reference, I'm half Irish, and my mum's side are Southern Irish Catholics. So that my grandmother and great grandmother and great grandparents, what a miracle meant to them is not how we perceive a miracle today. We're very blasé about it, right? It was almost blasphemy to mention a miracle in my nan's household, because if it wasn't ordained by the church, Jesus, or the saints, it wasn't a miracle. You're just using God's word out of context, and you weren't allowed to do that when I was a kid. I can tell you. And people don't, that people would perceive that as some godly miracle at another time, but it's how fantastically developed our bodies are to survive, and that what was talking about with that lady during the tsunami is your subconscious at work.
Yep. Totally. And in that case, exactly what it needs to do. This is our protective system that sometimes gets it wrong because of past experience. Yeah. My passion for all things pregnancy and birth actually came from, kind of two animals, one of them human. It's wonderful to hear that you've got Irish ancestry. I'm sure you can certainly hear, and your listeners can hear I am. My dad and mum found one night when I was 3. So your 3-year-old is not in her bed. It's the nightmare of most parents. And they found me by one of my dad's sows. Now, my dad was a pig farmer, hence why he had sows. And I was sitting by the sow while she was giving birth. absolutely fascinated by the experience. Scared the life out of my parents, but they got to know in the intervening years that if I was missing, that's probably where I was.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinated by it. But a bit closer to our species, one of my grandmothers, my dad's mum, had 11 children. My other grandmother had 7. So typical big Irish family.
Good old Irish family. They love their kids.
Absolutely. 41 first cousins. There aren't many people that have that many. So we didn't buy birthday cards for everyone, by the way. There was an unspoken rule that we didn't need to. But because of that, I was raised, if you like, around the miracle of fertility. And I still feel, okay, I use miracle in a different context, but I still see the whole thing as an incredible miracle, even though because of my work, I understand the science behind it. Still a miracle. It's still amazing.
But I still agree that it is a miracle. But people don't realize that the miracle lies within.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think the thing of it so difficult and it is frustrating and it's painful because like I use for terms of terminology and communication, I use things like iPhones and Samsung phones to demonstrate difference. But another way of like looking at the rational brain and the subconscious is it's like diesel cars and petrol cars. Now, if anyone's ever put petrol in a diesel or diesel in a petrol, they'll realise, well, it doesn't. Well, hang on a second. Yeah, right. Well, why is my car not working? They're both combustible engines. What's the problem? Well, actually, technically, that's not true. Petrol's combustible. Diesel works on pressure. So, right. But it's they can. We get these harmonies where things work in sort of symbiotic relationships, and when that relationship is good, everything is firing on all cylinders. Everything works really, really well. But when one of them is kind of out of sync, it can affect the other without you realizing why. And sometimes, like you and I are talking about things, and we'll both have this in our own practices. And every therapist will tell you the same. If somebody will come in and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I care about that? No, it's your rational brain can set aside and sit down and say, well, that's not important. Your rational brain will do a to-do list of pros and cons. How am I better off? How am I worth? And we can literally rationalize it till the cows come home, and then say, no, that's not bothering me. But your subconscious is much more controlled by your emotions, how it feels safe or not safe. And no matter how you rationalize or try to put logic into something that your subconscious is fearful of, the two are just square pegs or round holes. And no matter how hard you try and beat it, no matter how big the hammer is, it's not shifting. It's not going to fit.
Yeah, exactly that. You mentioned symbiotic relationships, and one of my favorite, I have many, but one of my favorite facts about pregnancy is that when you have another system, body and mind, that has the potential to react inside a woman's body, and her mind and body connection within there, we now know that if a woman during pregnancy, i.e. when there's a developing fetus in there, has organ damage for some reason, the baby has a symbiotic relationship because it wants to survive. He or she, should I say, wants to survive. So they will actually send stem cells to the organ that is not working properly to attempt to repair it. So and that is a scientific fact, so that even the baby is saying, whoa, hang on here, I've got to survive. So I'll help you to survive to help me to survive, because you're my host, if you like, as I'm developing. Yeah.
That does make sense to me, because there is, I'm trying to think where it is now. I think one is in Colombia and there's another one in Mexico. And there's these hospitals now that do a lot of stem cell therapy.
Yes.
Where they literally inject your stem cells into a damaged part of your body. And I don't know the science exactly of how it works. but yeah, effectively it sends a signal to that part of your subconscious, I suppose, to repair the organ, and your stem cells are literally being used to repair people's ligaments, organs. Just like people are going in there. I think it was fighters that first started using it because they had damaged shoulders, damaged knees, damaged hips, and I think it was kind of, or at least that's how I know of it, is through MMA fighters and boxers and stuff like that, and through Mel Gibson on the Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe Rogan has championed it as well for a dodgy shoulder. Yeah, they collect your stem cells, inject it into a damaged area, and it starts repairing it.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
And it does make sense what you're saying, because it's kind of, when you and I are talking about it, it kind of sounds silly if you think that a woman who's pregnant, that the signals only go one way. No, it makes perfect sense that the child, as it's developing, is going to be involved in the survival of its mother.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I've literally never thought about that until you just mentioned it, and it's just like, no, that would make perfect sense, because otherwise, exactly the same thing. A child, it won't develop if it doesn't feel safe.
Exactly. And it's the same kind of signals that we use still with pregnancy, that the morning sickness and the hormonal changes that are the most likely cause behind that. There are many causes, but again, we're sending different signals about actually about feeling okay, about being able to focus on functioning, and of course, including if someone's suffering nausea and vomiting, then that's not going to be conducive to being able to sustain a developing fetus and a mum herself. So there are lots of things that we can do to help the system just to adjust to that, and just to kind of calm down, if you like, those signals. Yeah. And goodness, the signals, I was just going to say, in birth, we know that labours are 3.23 hours shorter in length when using hypnobirthing, because hypnobirthing is about teaching you how to be able to stand back from anything that might hinder the process, and kind of to let it go along unhindered, because the body knows how to do this. There are lots of other.
Well, that's probably a good thing to move into, is because there is something that's always fascinated me about birth, right? Is, and again, I'm trying not to be clumsy with my wording, but
go ahead.
like you and I said, we've been doing this for 2 million years.
Yeah.
But it's about since the Industrial Revolution that we seem to be getting it wrong. And if you look at child mortality rates and what we know from the fossil records, and I could be a little bit out here, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close. Child mortality rates during the Industrial Revolution, and from when we went from being nomadic to farming to the Industrial Revolution, rose. From what we understand of human evolution, when we were nomadic and just hunter-gatherers, which we were up until for about 99.9% of human evolution, to give it some context, it's like this era that we think we're in is if you were talking about a fetus, it's probably still semen swimming up the uterus.
Yeah.
That's where modern humans, that's literally where we are on the timeline. We haven't even seen the egg yet.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I'll borrow that one.
Yeah. So I've often, when you and I were talking, I was just like, that's an interesting concept, because we knew how to do it for 2 million years.
Yes.
So what changed?
Yeah. So I think we need a 3-hour podcast to talk about the history of birth.
I was saying this because I am.
No, don't worry.
No. Actually, that is a very good point, because I am obviously careful of the time, and I was going to say to you, should we do a part 2?
Maybe we need to.
Because this has been a fascinating topic.
I am more than happy to do that. So there's one aspect, and you know, joking aside, really, there are many aspects that led to that change. And as you say, we've been around for 2 million years, and we're still here. So we must have been doing something right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the, and like I say, I would love to do something about the history of birth, because that is fascinating in itself. But if we give a teaser, as it was with that, around the time of Queen Victoria, just before that, chloroform was introduced as a pain relief, not specific to childbirth, but full stop. And with chloroform being introduced, there was, which I won't go into now, but definitely will in future. That there was, let's just say, there was a whole kind of history prior to that, where the attitudes towards pregnant women meant that they wouldn't give chloroform to women, and there was a whole religious movement behind that, feeling that actually they don't deserve it. I mean that word, deserve.
Oh yeah, so, no, I can understand that.
If anybody's listening to this and they think they want to hear about history, believe me, it's fascinating. So with that, women weren't given chloroform. Queen Victoria then had yet another child, as we know. I can't even remember now how many she had, but quite a few. And she was having her child, and because she was the queen, she said, I want chloroform. Because we were taught up to that point that even though birth is a natural process, it's been around for 2 million years, there was a lot of stuff through history that it became something to fear. And we talk about the fear, tension, pain cycle, whereby it is as simple as that. The vicious cycle between our anxieties, creating tensions, creating pain. There's a lot more to that, but let's keep it summarized by that for now. And so people were afraid of birth. They were also afraid of dying because of the history that had happened prior to that. So pain relief and the experience of pain was very much at that point in history a part of childbirth, where it most definitely hadn't been if we go way back. It's a natural process. Pain's about telling us there's something wrong. If this is meant to happen, why exactly would we be having that? So Queen Victoria asked for chloroform, and she was the queen, so why couldn't she?
Queen says, queen gets.
Exactly. And what happened, because chloroform was a very dangerous form of pain relief to give and caused so many problems itself, certainly came along with so many risks, then birth was moved into hospital to be able to administer chloroform. So it wasn't the danger of birth that meant most of the movement into hospital environments. It was actually the danger of giving pain relief. And so we are still left with this inevitable fear of pain. And we teach women actually how to be able to, if you imagine pain on a continuum from, to comfortable one end to pain up the other, we teach women to master ideal mental states where they're not hindering the process, including not creating that tension, therefore not creating that pain. So where they are on the continuum is as close to the comfortable end as their unique experience will be. We do not teach that no women will ever feel pain in childbirth or discomfort in childbirth. We absolutely know everybody's experience is different, but we're teaching them not to create that tension that creates more pain. And with hypnosis, we also have the ability to teach pain management or discomfort management techniques that actually, wherever they are on that continuum, we can turn it down even further, as long as it's safe to do so, because we want women still to be listening to their bodies. But with elective C-sections, for example, so planned C-sections, because it's an operation, like any operation, it's managed, and so we can teach people to turn those signals off altogether. and quite safely, because they don't need to listen to what's going on in their body. And so I've attended several elective C-sections and operations outside of that, including a chest operation with an anaesthetist.
All right. Well, because
so that's an anaesthetist that didn't use anaesthetic.
Well, because that's
conclusions.
Well, because that's the thing, isn't it? Because there's an interesting thing you were talking about with the history of medicine is anaesthetics, which effectively chloroform was kind of, I think, the first industrialized use
rudimentary.
Of one. Yeah. Yes. But antiseptic came along about 50, 60, do you know what I mean? It came along much later. So we learned to numb pain so that people could have operations, but we knew nothing about germs. Mm-hmm. So nobody was clean. And mm-hmm. and it actually created more mortality. But it's interesting because one of the things that I don't think people fully grasp either is pain, in a sense, isn't real. It's only a signal from the nerve to the brain to say, by the way, I just need to let you know there's a problem. It's almost a bit like knocking on the door to say, sorry, I don't want to disturb you in the middle of your subconscious functions, but blood's pissing out and we need to do something about it. But it happens very rapidly. And is actually pain. Pain is a signal to your brain and you can switch it off.
Yeah. Exactly that. We say there is no pain without the involvement of the brain. So, if you injure your foot and say you've been a real idiot and kind of hit something hot, and so you've caused possible burning or heat damage, as well as the impact, maybe broken bones or whatever. And so the signals, just to illustrate exactly what you're saying there, the signals via the nerve endings that would be about touch or impact, as well as the heat nerve endings, they're going to send messages via the spinal cord up to the brain, where the brain, as you say, then interprets and says, hang on, we're being told there's heat and impact here. We need to do something. And so your brain is the one that then decides what to do next. So that would be the withdrawal of your foot, for example, so you don't continue causing more damage. Taking the weight off because the brain is sending relay signals that tell you to feel pain. So the brain generates the pain after getting the signals. But your brain will also say, that you set your iPhone or Samsung on other phones are available, that you've set that on the side because actually you need to ring your partner because your kid's about to be collected from school and there's no way you're going to be driving right now, or you've done a first aid course last week. You remember where you put the papers about that. Maybe you need to read up on what to do about heat damage. So your brain is collecting all of these things, but sending relay signals back to the foot in this case to tell it how to feel. And so absolutely we can turn them down or switch them off altogether.
It is, and it's like when you say when you get into these things and you start talking about it. Hopefully people will be listening to this and start to feel a bit more comfortable about about the things you have control over that you actually might feel that you can't control. It's just understanding that the logical part of your brain or the rational part of your brain isn't where you need to seek control. What you need is to tap into the tools that you can use for your subconscious brain, and it's not to control the subconscious, it's to let the subconscious relax
and to let it know when perhaps it's got it wrong, to kind of accept, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but maybe not in this way.
That's literally it, isn't it? It's almost like having a conversation with it and saying, hey, look, I know you've got my back, and thank you for that because you do an amazing job. But you're a little overzealous right now, and I just need you're a bit clingy in this relationship. You're a little bit overprotective, but I appreciate it and I love you for it. But can you just please shut up and give me some space?
Exactly. Yeah. Or just change what you believe about this situation.
Yeah.
As you say. So it's not. The reason I say that is because it's not always about being calm. I mean, calm is one of the huge side effects that we want from a hypnotic state in hypnobirthing. Positive side effect, obviously. But we also enter hypnotic states, which we enter up to 600 times a day as an average human adult. Children more, because they encounter more new situations with new sensory information, whereas we're old hat, we've got a bit more life experience. So we only go into it 600, a mere
that's it,
number. I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So because we're entering into that 600 times a day, we are processing all of the information that comes in. So all of that is collecting. Most of it will collect dust. Like, there's a mark on my wall over there. It's only a tiny mark. It's not causing anybody problem. My brain is taking in that signal plus so many other things at once. If there was something that was a threat, like if I'm afraid of spiders, and I'm not, and I saw quite a massive big one with very long hairy legs over there, then my amygdala would be triggering threat. So sometimes it's about telling the subconscious not just to calm down, but yes, to say, well, let's reframe our belief about spiders. So it's about doing that. But also, we also know hypnotic states are felt in times of shock or in times of trauma. We dissociate what we just can't deal with right now. So somebody with that's just suffered a major bereavement is suddenly going, what sandwiches do you reckon we should have, at the funeral? And everyone else is going, have you even sussed what's just gone on, the enormity of what's happened here? But actually they haven't. And it's a hypnotic state that helps them to detach from that. Now, that's not calm. That's a kind of a detachment, a dissociation. Same thing happens in genuine trauma. We detach from that experience.
Would it be just kind of a context in a different example? Do you know that? And like I said, I'm not sure if this is correct, so I'm genuinely asking you if it is. When people talk about when they drive to work, but they don't know how they got there? Is that another form of hypnotic state that people can think, I dangerously do that every day?
Yes. You are absolutely right. You'll see me nodding. There's one thing I'm going to correct there is the dangerous bit. And it absolutely no. I'm picking, but an important pick. So that absolutely, that is one of what tends to be quite a long autopilot state. Also, if we're involved in a piece of work, if it's really kind of, engrossed us, we can lose track of time, and time distortion is part of a hypnotic state, or that alpha brainwave.
Because we call it autopilot, but it's actually a hypnotic state.
Yes, yes, exactly. It's one way. We're not always doing autopilot, i.e. continuing a task when we're in a hypnotic state, but it's certainly one type of hypnotic state. But it's not dangerous because
no, of course,
and there have been studies done on this, as with most things. So we know that if you're driving along and you're on autopilot, what's actually happening is your subconscious is running a program of you driving from home to work, for example. And so that journey is familiar. The program has been run many, many times. So we know what happens. We know what roundabout we go round. We know what traffic lights we go through. We know to wait for it to turn green before we go through. So our subconscious is doing all of that, whilst our conscious is focusing on what we're going to have for dinner tonight, or, a million and one other things, because our subconscious has got the autopilot job. But if something happened that was outside of our normal program, so if somebody pulled out in front of you, or let's leave it at that. If something unexpected happened, It's not part of the program that's just churning over and being run out. It's not part of your software, if you like. And so the conscious mind would go, oh, what just happened? There have been many, many experiments done on that, but we know that reaction times are actually slightly quicker in a hypnotic state. And it's because we're almost blinkered towards this program. So if anything happens outside of that, it is a knock, knock, knock on the door of the conscious to react. Yeah.
Because there's people just go into that about the relaxed state, which is why you react quicker. That's the best example of that is athletes. And you'll see athletes when they're tense, they don't react and they don't respond as well. But the athletes, probably the best example of a relaxed athlete was Usain Bolt. He did his best runs and his world records when he was at his most relaxed.
Yeah.
In the peak of his career. And just for somebody else, because people, in case somebody does question, well, then why do most accidents happen closer to home? It's because that's the majority of your driving. Yeah. I know this because I'm an ex-car trade guy, so
yes.
Although the autopilot, the hypnotic state, is your most relaxed, it's the reason that you have the most accidents closer to home is because 90% of your driving is done like those journeys. So that's why that happens. It's not to do with the hypnotic state.
No, it's not at all. It's not at all. Usain Bolt, as you said, did his best running when he was in the zone again.
Yeah,
that kind of linkered state, completely focused on the task in hand. We, with women giving birth, we actually call it labour land.
Oh, right.
It's not a medical term.
Well, because if you look at some on YouTube clips of Usain Bolt when he's getting ready for the starting blocks, all the other athletes are trying to like psych themselves out, and he's fist bumping the people, the attendees who are like looking after his bag and stuff, and he fist bump. There's a famous one where he swaps caps with one. And
excellent.
He's one is in the 2012 Olympics, and he fist bumps this girl, and he's just chatting to her. And the funny thing is, the kids or the teenagers that attend get told they're not allowed to speak to the athletes because you're not supposed to distract them. And Usain Bolt comes up and starts dancing, fist bumping, swaps hats with this girl, and it's amazing. But that's how he stayed in his relaxed state.
His belief system, and it, was already that, as far as he's concerned, he's about to do his best run that he possibly can do. He's about to reach his potential. So to him, there's no threat there. So he's able, as you say, to do everything else. I don't know, actually staying with athletics, whether you know the story about Roger Bannister, the guy that ran the under
4 minute mile.
Yeah. And it's interesting is what happened after it. That's,
it was broken, like just literally within a week of him doing it.
Yes.
Or 2 weeks, or basically the next big run, I think it was broken and then broken again and then broken again and broken again.
57 other athletes within 7 months. 57. And they had all been trying before. But the word, if we are going to try something, it's a message to our subconscious that we don't actually believe we're going to be successful.
Because people don't realise that before Roger Bannister came along, it was agreed in medical science that it was impossible, humanly impossible, to break the 4 minute barrier for the mile.
Yes.
And then once Roger Bannister did it, literally everybody did it afterwards.
Exactly. And he, I'm sure you probably know this, but he was a medical student, and that's why he disagreed with medical science. And actually, he was able to go down that belief system of going, I don't believe this is impossible. I actually believe that I can do it. So
I didn't know he was a medical student.
Everything there, motivation, drive, everything to prove them wrong. I mean, who wouldn't want to? But also the fact that his belief system had a massive shift to all of the people who were trying. It wasn't that nobody had tried beforehand. Just about every athlete, every athlete in the world was every semi-professional was actually trying to do that, but they didn't believe they could because medical science said it was impossible.
And that is actually what was said. It is impossible. And then
Yeah.
somebody just like you, and this is probably a great kind of place to finish on this, is how powerful hypnosis can be. Because when you change that belief system,
Mhm.
then your brain, well, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your brain telling you what's possible, really. And of course, we're being realistic. We're being realistic, in all of the areas that we work with hypnosis. We're not going to convince someone that if they believe that they can fly unaided, that they're going to be able to fly. It is about realism. It's about being able to if you like, master and fine tune your subconscious so that it's working for your best interests. So if you believe that the compliment that your boss has paid you for a report that you've done, it genuinely means that you have competence in doing that and you deserve that compliment. It's not being taken over by not good enough beliefs from the past when you think, oh, there must be loads of mistakes. He obviously hasn't looked at it properly, or maybe he's laughing behind my back and it's really a crap report. So it's about fine-tuning your brain so that it's working for your best interest. And we're exactly the same in birth, and pregnancy and fertility, moving back now, and in parenthood. It's about saying, do you know what? It is all right. Believe in what's possible. Believe in being a good enough parent. Believe in a positive birth experience. And that doesn't mean everything has to go exactly according to plan. Believe in your ability even to adjust, including different modes of delivery if something happens outside your control. So it's most definitely, it's about really believing in yourself so that your brain is telling you what is possible and what you're truly capable of.
And that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
And we'll arrange to do a part 2 very soon.
Definitely. Definitely. Looking forward to it.